The millionaire pushed open the kitchen door and froze at the sight before him. His 7-year-old daughter kneeling in a puddle of spilled milk, clutching her baby brother who was crying hoarsely. With just one word, "Stop," the veneer of elegance that covered the house cracked wide open, exposing a web of threats, starvation, and a cunning plan to seize the family's fortune. Who had turned a home into a locked cage for 2 innocent children? Before we begin the story, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how many points would you give this story? Now, let's get started. The large house on Brooklyn Heights that evening was quieter than usual. Alexander Reed, 40 years old, a millionaire known in New York's real estate circles, walked through the door after canceling an important meeting with a partner. The tall man, whose face was always as cold as a stone wall, still carried the same weariness as he did every day. He had lost his wife less than 10 months earlier, her death from postpartum complications leaving an emptiness in him that nothing could ever replace. And to escape the pain, Alexander buried himself in work, then in a new marriage with Victoria Hayes, a beautiful 35-year-old woman known for her flawless appearance and a voice as sweet as honey. The first thing Alexander noticed when he stepped into the living room was the emptiness. Every day at this hour, he usually saw his daughter Sophia sitting on the blue couch, holding tightly to her 10-month-old brother Jacob. The 7-year-old girl, with her soft brown hair identical to her mother's, often sat there in silence, waiting for him to come home, sometimes only for the sake of a dismissive nod. But today, the couch was empty. Alexander frowned slightly. He removed his Burberry coat and draped it over the chair, still dressed in his Armani suit, his leather shoes tapping lightly on the wooden floor. The unusual stillness unsettled him. Then, from the end of the hallway, came a shrill sound, Victoria's piercing scream. Immediately after, there was the hoarse crying of a child, Jacob's broken sobs. Alexander quickened his pace, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar urgency. He pushed open the kitchen door, and the sight before him froze him in place. On the cold tile floor, milk spread in white puddles. The bottle had been knocked over, rolling across the ground. Sophia, wearing the old yellow dress he had once bought for her at Macy's for her 6th birthday, was trembling as she knelt beside Jacob. The baby's face was flushed red, his little hands flailing in the air, crying so hard it seemed he could hardly breathe. Nearby sat a small bowl of milk, clearly taken from somewhere else. Victoria stood opposite them, her red dress hugging her slender frame, her hair tied neatly in a high bun. But her face no longer carried its usual gentle charm. Instead, it burned with unleashed fury. In her hand was a glass pitcher, drops of milk still dripping down onto the floor. Sophia screamed in panic, her small hands still trying to shield Jacob. "I'm sorry. I only wanted my little brother to have a full stomach." Alexander froze for a beat, then roared. "What are you doing, Victoria? Put that cup down right now. Who gave you the right to pour milk over my child's head?" His voice thundered across the kitchen, sharp and cutting. "That is my child. Do you understand?" Victoria flinched, fear flashing in her eyes, then quickly regained her composure. She set the cup down, took a deep breath, and lowered her voice as if trying to explain. "My love, I was only teaching her a lesson. Sophia secretly took the milk I use for skincare and bathing. She gave it to Jacob without asking. I'm afraid she'll form bad habits, and it will become routine. Do you think it doesn't hurt me?" She stepped closer, lightly touching her husband's arm, her eyes glistening. "If you dismiss me like this in front of the children, they'll think I have no voice. I only want what's best for them." Alexander's fury wavered, as though a fog had been thrown over it. He still saw the milk streak down his daughter's cheek, still heard Jacob's hoarse crying, yet Victoria's fingers pressing gently against his sleeve made him hesitate. What do you mean by that?" he muttered, his gaze momentarily drifting. Victoria pressed further. "The girl didn't ask for permission. I only reminded her to respect boundaries. We have to be united, otherwise the children will grow worse." Alexander turned to Sophia. The little girl was soaked, clutching Jacob tightly, her wide eyes fixed on him. He handed her a towel, lowering his voice though keeping the stern edge. "Sophia, you cannot take your stepmother's things without asking again. Next time, if something happens, you tell me. I will handle it. Do you understand?" Sophia bit her lip and gave the faintest nod. "I'm sorry. I only wanted—" Alexander drew in a breath, ready to say more but unable to find the words. Victoria quickly interjected, her tone softening like a gentle drizzle. "See, she already knows she was wrong. We're guiding her together, aren't we?" He nodded just to end it, his eyes growing cold again. Sophia bowed her head, her tears mixing with the milk on her face. She held Jacob close against her chest, whispering so softly only he could hear. "We just have to endure." Alexander walked quickly out of the kitchen, his hand unconsciously tightening on the door until the sound of wood echoed dry and sharp. He went straight up to the second floor, each step heavy as if carrying the weight of the entire house. The long hallway, lit by the yellow glow reflecting off expensive paintings, hung in a perfect line, blurred before his eyes, for Alexander could see nothing but Sophia's face drenched in milk. He opened the study, a wide room with dark wooden shelves and a desk holding a sleek silver MacBook. Alexander sat down, opened the laptop, his hands hesitating for a moment before typing the password. On the screen appeared a folder he had avoided for months. The folder bore the name Olivia. Olivia Reed, his first wife, the gentlewoman who had been by his side for 10 years. He clicked on a short video, the screen filled with Olivia's face, her long black hair falling softly, her brown eyes gentle, tired yet full of love. Her voice rose lightly, warm, as if it still lingered in the room. "Alexander, I have a bad feeling. If I am no longer here, please take care of Sophia and Jacob. Do not let the light in her eyes fade. Her eyes will speak for her. And please, never blame the boy. It is not his fault." Alexander sat motionless. For a moment, the room seemed to stop breathing. He pressed a hand to his forehead, eyes closed, the image of Sophia kneeling beside her brother in the kitchen flooding back. Her eyes filled with fear and a desperate longing to be protected, exactly as Olivia had said. A cry rang out from downstairs, sharp and familiar. "Jacob." Alexander hesitated for a beat, then walked to the window. He looked down into the yard and saw Sophia carrying her brother across, trying to soothe Jacob's cries. Her thin shoulders wavered under the weight of the 10-month-old boy. The little girl's gaunt face, her eyes red from tears. Alexander called softly, his voice stripped of its usual firmness, falling instead like a plea. "Sophia, come here." The girl stopped, lifted her head. Her wide eyes met her father's gaze for only a fleeting moment before she turned away. Sophia shook her head, clutching Jacob tighter, then walked off, disappearing down the long hallway. Alexander let out a deep sigh, his hand hovering in midair before falling limply to his side. A heavy sense of helplessness pressed against his chest. He wanted to hold on to his daughter, yet he had no idea where to begin. The door behind him creaked open. A familiar voice slipped into the room, sweet yet tinged with reproach. "Are you thinking about them again?" Victoria stepped inside. She wore a beige silk dress, her hair cascading loosely over her shoulders, the scent of Chanel No. 5 lingering in the air. Her face was flawless, but her eyes flickered with irritation. "Alexander, we already agreed. You have to let the past rest. You promised me we would start a new life together. Do you really want to keep drowning in old sorrows?" Alexander did not answer. He turned his gaze to the picture frame on his desk. Inside the frame was Olivia, holding Sophia on her 3rd birthday. Both were laughing brightly. A gentle Olivia, a pure Sophia, and he himself at that moment, still a man who knew how to smile. The distance between that image and his present reality was unbearable, stabbing at his chest with each breath. Victoria moved closer, her soft hand resting on his shoulder, her voice low but firm. "You need to let me take care of everything. We deserve a new beginning, not a life where you keep staring at those children and reliving a sad ending." Alexander remained silent. He sat up straight, lifted the frame of Olivia, and gently touched the glass. Victoria's reflection wavered across the surface, but in his eyes there was only Olivia's smile. And then her words echoed in his mind, clear as if whispered right beside his ear. "Don't let the light in her eyes fade. She will speak through them." Alexander tightened his grip on the frame, his heart weighed down. He knew he could not keep turning his back forever. Alexander turned off the screen, placed Olivia's photo frame back in its spot, and stepped out into the hallway. As he went down a few steps, he heard Jacob's crying echo faintly from the kitchen, the sound growing weaker as Sophia carried her brother away. Alexander paused on the landing, resting his hand on the railing, but then he let it drop and kept walking, his wife's last words still ringing in his head. The school bell rang for the next period in the cafeteria. Sophia stood pressed against the water fountain, her stomach twisting from hunger. On a nearby table, a classmate had left behind a half-eaten sandwich. She glanced around, her small hand hesitating before she slowly pulled the sandwich toward her. Just as her fingers touched it, the child turned back, surprised. Sophia flushed instantly, clutching the sandwich to her chest as if it were a secret, her voice trembling and so low only the two of them could hear. "I'm sorry, my baby brother is so hungry. I just wanted to bring it home for him." The child hesitated, not knowing how to respond, when a warm, steady woman's voice came from behind. "Let me take a look." A woman in her mid-30s, hair neatly tied back, wearing a name tag that read Emily Parker, homeroom teacher of Sophia's class, stepped forward. She didn't scold. Instead, she opened her bag, took out a carton of milk and a small packet of cookies, and placed them in Sophia's hands. "Drink this, then finish your own portion. I'll ask the cafeteria to make another one for your classmate. Next time, just tell me earlier, all right?" Sophia looked up, her eyes glistening with tears, and gave the faintest nod. Emily lowered her voice further. "I'll ask the cafeteria to save you an extra portion, and if you need to, you can take a milk carton home for your brother." Sophia hugged the carton of milk as if it were a promise, whispered a soft thank you, then slipped back to the corner of the table, still fiddling with the frayed strap of her backpack. By late afternoon, Sophia clutched her nearly torn backpack and ran through the row of houses in Brooklyn Heights. She tapped lightly on the apartment door across the hall. Patricia Gomez, the elderly retired neighbor, opened the door. She wore thin-rimmed glasses, her hands dusted with flour from the kitchen. "It's you again, Sophia." The little girl looked down at her shoes, her voice barely more than a breeze. "Grandma, do you have any leftover bread? Jacob is hungry." Patricia sighed, opened the cupboard, and took out a bag of warm muffins. "Take this. Give your brother his share first, then keep one for yourself. Do you hear me?" Sophia hugged the bag tightly, bowing deeply. "Thank you." Patricia watched her leave, her eyes shimmering. A few minutes later, Alexander stepped into the elevator, still holding his phone. As the doors opened, he ran into Patricia in the lobby. She studied him for a moment, then spoke directly, her voice blunt. "Your little girl is far too thin, Mr. Reed. She came to me asking for bread." Alexander froze for half a second, then tightened his grip on the phone as if it were an anchor. "You must be mistaken. Probably just a child being greedy." Patricia frowned but didn't argue. "I've been a mother, and I'm a grandmother now. I know what hunger looks like." She turned and walked away, leaving Alexander standing alone in the lobby, an unease rising inside him, slow but relentless. When he got home, Alexander opened the refrigerator. The milk bottle was almost untouched. The children's food tray in the lower compartment was completely empty. He closed the fridge, the soft thud stretching inside his mind like a scratch across glass. From the living room came Victoria's voice on the phone, her tone sweet as honey while mentioning a party invitation for a married couple. Alexander did not step in. He walked past the hallway and stopped in front of the children's room. The door was closed, no laughter inside. He asked himself why the house had everything expensive, yet the kitchen so rarely carried the scent of warm milk. Night fell softly like a thick blanket. Victoria had already gone upstairs to remove her makeup, faint music drifting from the speaker on her dressing table seeping through the crack of the door. Passing through the kitchen to get water, Alexander noticed the lights were off, leaving only the thin glow from the dishwasher still running. He was about to pour a glass and head back upstairs when he caught a faint rustling near the back door. Alexander froze, listening. The rustling came again, cautious, almost frightened. He turned the latch and opened the back door. A rush of cold air slipped in, carrying the metallic smell of garbage bins and the soapy scent from the neighbor's backyard laundry. On the steps sat a small figure, huddled tight. Sophia. The little girl pressed herself into the corner, hand reaching into a flimsy plastic bag with leftover bread loosely tied, her eyes blinking quickly, afraid of being caught. Beside her, Jacob lay in an old stroller, head resting on a thin blanket, eyes swollen from crying. Alexander stood frozen at the threshold. There was no barrier left between him and the truth. Sophia startled and spun around, hastily hiding the piece of bread behind her back, her lips trembling. "Dad, please. Jacob is so hungry." The words caught halfway. Alexander's throat burned dry. He saw the tiny hand trembling, saw the boy's swollen eyes heavy with exhaustion, and in his mind shattered an expanse of silence so immense it forced him to step back. Above, Olivia seemed to whisper once more. Don't let the light in her eyes fade. Sophia did not cry. She only clutched the bag of bread tighter, shielding her brother as if it had become second nature. Jacob wheezed, his little hand reaching into the air before dropping. Alexander opened his mouth, but the words refused to leave. Before him stood a wealthy house filled with perfect objects, and right on the doorstep were his children surviving on someone else's leftovers. His hand gripped the doorframe, his breath heavy. In the darkness, everything became cruelly clear. Before he could speak a word, Jacob let out a weak cry. Sophia bent down in panic, soothing him quickly, whispering under her breath, "Don't cry, I have bread for you." Alexander remained standing, heart pounding heavy and slow, as if each beat carried a question without escape. He lowered himself slightly, fingertips brushing the icy doorframe, realizing there was nowhere left to hide from his child's eyes. Alexander stood at the doorway for another beat, then leaned slightly so the kitchen light spilled onto the steps. He inhaled, trying to steady his voice. He spoke softly so Sophia would not be startled. "Come inside." The girl clutched the bag of bread against her chest, gently pushed Jacob's stroller over the threshold. Alexander closed the door, his hand still trembling lightly from the cold and from what he had just witnessed. He pulled out a chair at the dining table and slid it toward Sophia. "Sit down." She hesitated, set the bag of bread beside her, and kept one hand on the stroller's handle to keep her brother calm. Jacob wheezed faintly, his cheeks flushed from exhaustion. Alexander poured warm water into a small glass and placed it in front of his daughter. He sat across from her, searching the eyes that avoided his. His voice dropped lower, no longer carrying the usual icy sharpness. "Do you have something you want to tell me?" Sophia lowered her head, her small hands clasped tightly together. She glanced at Jacob, then back to the table. Silence stretched out. Alexander waited, his heartbeat slow yet heavy, as if weighted by a stone. "I just want to know if you're all right." Sophia pressed her lips together, shook her head ever so slightly. "I'm fine." The reply was so faint, it was almost a breath. The sound of heels echoed from the hallway. Victoria appeared, silk dress flowing, hair now loose. She stopped at the doorway, observing for a moment, then smiled as if she had stumbled upon a tender family scene. "It's late. Why are you two still awake?" Alexander lifted his eyes and answered calmly, "I was just talking with her." Victoria stepped closer, laid a hand on Sophia's shoulder, her tone gentle. "She's a stubborn one. She likes to act up just to get affection. Don't worry. I'll talk to her later." Alexander looked at that hand on his daughter's shoulder. He wanted to brush it away, but his throat was parched. He pushed back his chair and stood, eyes shifting to Jacob as he spoke quietly. "Give the boy some milk. Then, everyone to bed." He left the kitchen, each step up the stairs slower and heavier than the last. Once Alexander was gone, Victoria leaned close to Sophia's ear, the smile vanishing as if it had never existed. Her voice thinned, cold as a strand of wire. "If you open your mouth, tomorrow Jacob won't get a single drop of milk." Sophia froze, clutching the side of the stroller. Victoria swept past her, opened the refrigerator, poured Jacob a meager portion of milk, sealed the bottle and placed it back exactly in its spot, every movement precise as if rehearsed. The next morning, in Emily Parker's classroom, Sophia sat tucked away at the end of the row. During recess, as she bent to pick up a pencil, her sleeve slid up, revealing a faint bluish bruise on her wrist. Emily caught sight of it and paused. She drew in a breath, then crouched down, keeping her voice calm. "Sophia, what happened to your hand?" The girl quickly pulled her arm back, tugging her sleeve down to cover it. I fell. Emily didn't press. She opened her desk drawer, handed Sophia a carton of milk and a piece of bread. "Drink this. Later I'll tell the kitchen to keep a portion aside for you. If you need to take something home for your brother, you let me know." Sophia accepted it, nodded, her eyes glistening before she lowered her head once more. When the students went outside, Emily returned to the teacher's desk and opened her private file. She quickly wrote a few lines about Sophia's condition, noting the date and time, the bruises, and the fact that the girl often asked for extra food. At the bottom of the page, she underlined a short line. "Continue close monitoring. Contact the school counselor if this repeats." That afternoon, Alexander came home on time. He went straight to his office, closed the door, and turned on the computer. A short email notification chimed once. He intended to ignore it, but the sound came again. Alexander opened his inbox. At the top of the incoming mail sat an anonymous email, no subject line, only a strange address. He hesitated, then clicked. Inside, there was only one short sentence, no image, no attachment. "If you are still a father, take a closer look at what is happening in your house." Alexander sat in silence, the glow of the screen casting sharp light across the bridge of his nose. His hand gripped the armrest of the chair. The words were simple, but they blew open the door that had only been slightly ajar in his mind. He looked through the glass panel, seeing the dark hallway. On the desk, Olivia's framed photo reflected the light. In the room, there was only the sound of his own breathing, slow and heavy, as if warning of a storm about to break. Alexander stared at the screen for a few more seconds before closing the laptop. He stood up, opened the office door, and walked straight to the kitchen. On the counter, the milk bottle was still nearly full, but the plastic bowl for children was spotless. He paused at the doorway and saw Sophia carrying Jacob around the living room to calm him down. The girl placed her brother down, pulled a chair closer, and pushed the bowl of porridge up to the stroller. She only took 2 small spoonfuls for herself, then carefully poured the rest into Jacob's bottle. Alexander said nothing. He simply stood still behind the wall and listened to his daughter's faint whisper, "Drink it, I'm full." Jacob stopped crying and sucked on the tiny milk bottle, while Sophia gulped down a mouthful of water as if to trick her own hunger. Alexander made a deliberate sound to announce his presence. Sophia flinched, turned around, and held the bottle tightly, her eyes showing a brief flicker of unease. He stepped forward, his voice calm. "Have you eaten?" The girl nodded quickly. "I ate already." Alexander looked at the empty bowl, looked at her hands clutching the bottle as if by instinct, then gave a slight nod but did not ask further. That evening, while Victoria was busy calling a friend named Laura about a weekend party, Alexander walked toward the children's room. He told himself he needed to find the teacher's communication sheet to sign, a specific enough reason to open his daughter's desk drawer. The room was unusually tidy. On the desk sat a box of crayons, a few loose sheets of drawings, and a small picture frame of Sophia at age 3, hugging her mother. Alexander pulled open the second drawer, in search of papers, when his fingertips brushed against something thick and soft, like an old piece of cardboard. He gently lifted it up. It was a small notebook with a blue cover, frayed at the edges, the corners taped together. Alexander sat down and opened the first page. Childish handwriting appeared, messy lines mixed with ink and heavy strokes, as if trying to preserve something important. "Today my brother cried because he was hungry. She made me kneel because I asked for more milk for him. She told me not to speak. If I did, he wouldn't get milk." Alexander turned more pages. Each one carried a day, a small detail, a trace of fear. Some pages had only one sentence, shaky and distorted. "If I tell, my brother will starve." His hand froze on that line. In his mind came the sound of Jacob's labored breathing, Sophia's lowered head, Olivia's words of warning. For the first time in many months, guilt accompanied by real fear rose within him, no longer a shadow he could sweep away with work or social dinners. He turned to the back pocket of the notebook and found several scraps tucked inside. Jacob's milk schedule written in Sophia's own hand, a few supermarket receipts from the corner store, and a sticky note scribbled, "Miss Emily said I could bring 1 carton of milk home. Don't let her know, she'll be mad." Alexander set the note down, his heartbeat slow but heavy. He lifted his eyes, looking around the room as though seeing his own house with different eyes. Everything was clean, orderly, but there was no trace of carefree childhood anywhere. The sound of heels echoed down the hallway. Alexander closed the notebook, but before he could put it away, Victoria opened the door, leaning her shoulder against the frame, her lips curling into a faint smile. "What are you doing in the girls' room?" Her voice was as light as a breeze, but her narrowed eyes cut toward his hands as sharply as a blade. Alexander instinctively moved the notebook behind his back. He stood, facing her, his voice flat and low. "Looking for the teacher's contact form. Where did you put it?" Victoria stepped in, a sweet fragrance of perfume spilling into the room. "I left it in the mailbox in the kitchen. You can ask me any time. There's no need to rummage through the child's room." She glanced at the desk, at the half-open drawer, then locked her gaze on Alexander. "We agreed that I would take care of the children. Don't let your past make everything fall apart again." Alexander did not look away. In those eyes he saw a thin veil, a practiced habit of control that came as naturally to her as breathing. He shifted half a step, closed the drawer, and kept the notebook behind him as though it were the only thread tying him to the truth. "I'll sign the teacher's form. It's late tonight." He moved past Victoria toward the door. She turned slightly, the smile still lingering. "Don't let work drain you. Tomorrow we still have the dinner party in Midtown." Alexander gave no reply. He walked down the hallway, each step measuring the length of the house, each step weighing the habits that had blinded him to his child's fear. In his study, he closed the door softly, leaned against the wood, and opened the notebook once more. The clumsy handwriting stared back at him, painfully honest, needing no grand words to speak its truth. He tightened his grip on the notebook. For the first time in months, his eyes no longer looked away. They sharpened, cold and clear, like the moment he signed a major contract, except this time there were no numbers to negotiate. He spoke to himself in a slow, steady murmur, as if sealing a vow. "I have to know the truth." Right after closing the office door, Alexander walked back to the children's room with deliberately slow steps. He placed the blue-covered notebook on the table, aligning its corners, as if reminding himself not to tremble anymore. Sophia was changing Jacob's diaper, her movements careful yet clumsy from exhaustion. When she saw her father, the girl froze for a moment, her eyelids fluttering quickly before lowering her gaze to the floor. Alexander pulled out a chair and sat across from her. He pushed the notebook toward his daughter, his voice low and gentle. "Sophia, did you write these lines? Is it true?" The girl looked at the notebook, then at Jacob. Her small hand clutched the hem of her yellow dress, her shoulders quivering slightly. At first, Sophia only shook her head, lips pressed tight until they turned pale. Jacob suddenly began to fuss, his hoarse cry from hunger striking straight into his father's chest. Sophia hurriedly lifted her brother, trying desperately to soothe him, but he would not stop. Tears burst from her eyes as though she had crossed a threshold she could no longer hold back. "I'm not afraid of being hit. I'm only afraid my brother will starve to death. Please, Dad, don't hate him." The words came out broken, but clear. Sophia buried her face in Jacob's hair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Alexander stood frozen. He saw Olivia's face again on the video screen, saw those gentle eyes with the plea he had tried to ignore. "Don't let our daughter's light go out." Now, that very light was before him, wet and shining with desperate brightness. Alexander reached for the baby's bottle and realized there were only a few drops left inside. He stood, went to the kitchen, poured milk and returned, placing it in his daughter's hands. Sophia clutched it as if holding on to an anchor. Jacob latched onto the bottle, his cries gradually fading. The room fell so quiet that Alexander could hear his own heartbeat pounding through every pulse. The door burst open. Victoria stepped in, her face still carrying that thin smile, but her eyes swept quickly across the table. She caught sight of the notebook, and in a movement sharp as a blade, she lunged to snatch it. "What is this?" She made it up. "She's jealous of her stepmother, so she's slandering me." Alexander managed to hold the notebook tight, his hand pressing down until his knuckles turned white. He raised his head, eyes locked on hers. "Leave it there." Victoria faltered for half a second at the icy sharpness in her husband's gaze. She immediately shifted her tone, pouring out her familiar softness into the space between them. "My love, children, imagine all sorts of things. I was only teaching her discipline. Don't let the past make everything complicated." Alexander did not argue. He opened the notebook again, turning to the page with the shaky handwriting. "If I speak, my brother will starve." He read the words slowly, each one carved like into wood. Victoria frowned, trying to pull back control. "You really believe these scribbles over me?" Alexander closed the book, placed it inside the small cabinet, and locked it. "Tomorrow, I will talk to you." His voice was flat and final, like sealing a business deal. But inside his heart, another decision had just been made. Victoria looked at the keys, guessing something. She lunged forward to pick up Jacob, but Sophia was already holding her brother tightly. Alexander signaled with his eyes. "Leave the child alone. Don't touch them." Victoria had no choice but to step back, her lips still smiling, though her gaze had hardened like glass. When Victoria left the room, Alexander took out his phone, standing by the window as he called a familiar number in the building. On the other end, a deep and calm male voice spoke. "This is Noah Patel, technical manager. How can I assist you, Mr. Reed?" Noah was Indian, in his 40s, reserved and discreet, specializing in handling the security systems for the residents. Alexander lowered his voice. "Tomorrow morning I need you to set up some recording devices in the house. Small ones. No need for a big team. I want it kept quiet." Noah answered briefly. "Understood. I'll be there at 7. The call ended, and Alexander put the phone away. The decision had been made, and this time he did not allow himself to hesitate. He turned back to the children's bed. Sophia was sitting down, her back against the wall, holding Jacob, who was dozing in her arms. Alexander knelt low to meet her eyes and spoke softly. "From now on, I'll be watching everything. I promise." Sophia looked up, the wariness still in her face, but deep in her eyes a faint spark had begun to appear. The sound of heels echoed in the hallway, and Victoria returned with a diluted bottle of milk. She reached out her hand toward Jacob. "Let me feed the boy." Alexander stood up, gently blocking her path. "No need. He just drank." Victoria gave a cold laugh. "You're exaggerating." Then she grabbed Sophia's wrist and pulled her up. "Go to bed." Her grip was slightly too strong, and Sophia flinched instinctively. Before being dragged toward the door, the girl glanced quickly at her father, whispering so fast it was as if she feared her words might vanish into the air. "Dad, if you really still love me, look at my brother. His eyes say everything." The door closed. In the room, Alexander remained still for a long time, listening to his own breathing. He opened a drawer and touched the cover of a notebook as if touching a testimony. For the first time, instead of fearing the memories of Olivia, he allowed them to stay to guide him. Tomorrow morning, the cameras would be working, and from this moment, he would no longer turn away. The next morning, at exactly 7 o'clock, Noah Patel brought 2 small devices the size of a button. He installed one on top of the kitchen cabinet, another in the living room angled toward the sofa. Alexander stood nearby, not saying much. When the indicator lights blinked, everything began to run. He walked down to the stair railing, appearing calmer than he felt, but inside his chest was a tense, expectant heartbeat. By noon, Alexander pretended to leave for a meeting. Victoria stayed at home with the children. The cameras captured fragments of an ordinary day that was anything but ordinary. Victoria slapped Sophia because a spoon fell to the floor. She poured out milk, diluted it, shook the bottle, then placed it out of Jacob's reach while he was thirsty. She opened her purse, pulled out the envelope of money Alexander had given her to buy things for the children, and sent a short message to her close friend Laura Mitchell. "Spa this afternoon, he's not home." Victoria's mocking laugh echoed across the spotless kitchen floor. Late in the afternoon, Alexander returned and called Henry Collins. Henry, nearly 50, was the family lawyer and an old friend of Olivia. He came immediately, tall and lean, eyes sharp yet warm. The two of them sat in front of the screen. No one spoke for several minutes. Only when the footage showed Victoria gripping Sophia's shoulders, speaking harshly about boarding school for good children, did Henry turn, half of his face drained of color, though his words came out firm. This isn't just abuse. This is a scheme for appropriation. You need to cut off the money flow and freeze the secondary account right away, and we'll need more evidence for the property side." Alexander nodded. He picked up his phone and called Detective Daniel Harris at the city police department. Harris, about 40, specialized in child-related cases, speaking slowly but firmly. Alexander explained briefly and asked for confidentiality. Harris asked only the necessary questions. "Keep recording. Don't confront her yet. I'll arrange a verification unit and contact the prosecutor once we have enough." Alexander said thank you, hung up, and felt as if there was now a clear track laid beneath his feet. That evening, Victoria dressed elegantly as if expecting company, though it was just a family dinner. She ladled soup, her voice sweet as honey. "I've been looking into some good boarding schools. Sophia needs discipline and structure. She'll be grateful to us one day." Sophia held back tears, quietly sliding the tender pieces of meat into Jacob's bowl. Alexander put his spoon down and asked as if considering a distant matter. "Which schools? How much are the tuition fees? Has anyone advised you?" Victoria smiled, sensing momentum. "I have a friend who's excellent. She handles all the paperwork. Everything will be fine." Sophia glanced quickly at her father. Her eyes were weak, but trying to cling to hope. Alexander inhaled slowly, nodded as though in agreement, then continued eating. The dinner passed in a kind of false peace, and for the first time, he allowed it to play out. The next day, Victoria went out with Laura Mitchell. The door camera recorded them laughing, spa bags in hand, discussing a new treatment package. "He trusts me now, Laura. Just a few more weeks and it's done." That afternoon, Alexander went to the bank. He blocked access to the secondary card, set transaction alerts, and moved the children's tuition funds into a separate account. Henry sat beside him, reviewing old authorizations. "Revoke every power of attorney signed before the marriage. I'll draft the letters and send them tonight." Henry's voice was steady, revealing his practiced manner when legal risk loomed. Friday night, the apartment lights glowed for guests. Victoria introduced a man in a dark suit, neat tie, hair slicked back. "This is Richard Coleman, my personal attorney." Richard shook Alexander's hand, smiling just enough. His eyes scanned the room as if measuring the size of a new asset. "I can help simplify the ownership structure, reduce risks, and optimize taxes." Alexander leaned slightly, hiding his wariness behind a calm face. "I'll consider it if it makes sense." Richard glanced at Victoria, as though their agreement had been rehearsed, then opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "We'll use a temporary transfer document, only to make management easier." His tone was smooth, but the language carried the weight of possession. When Richard went into the kitchen to get water, Victoria leaned close to Alexander's ear. "Just sign it. It's only paperwork. I'm tired of handling everything myself." Alexander glanced down the hallway, where a small camera was quietly recording. He poured himself some wine, lifted his glass, pretending to relax. "I'll read it after dinner. Don't rush me." Dinner that evening was a staged performance. Victoria brought up the subject of boarding school again, repeating the same argument for the children's future. Sophia kept her head down, focused on feeding Jacob, careful not to spill a drop. Alexander asked only short questions. "Who introduced you? Where did you meet?" Victoria answered smoothly, her eyes glowing as if she could already see the finish line. Richard sat back listening, occasionally adding a few polished words like efficient, convenient, safe. When it was time for paperwork, Victoria placed the file on the coffee table in the living room. Just a few signatures. Richard flipped to the page marked for signing and pushed a pen across the table. "Here and here." Victoria drew out a gold-capped pen, her hand trembling ever so slightly with excitement. "With this, everything will be tidy." At the very moment the pen touched the paper, the office door opened. Alexander walked out, unhurried, but each step deliberate. He did not look at Richard first. He fixed his gaze on Victoria, eyes no longer clouded, no longer hesitant. His voice cut low and cold, slicing through the polished atmosphere that had filled the room. "I've seen enough. It's time you showed your true face." Victoria's pen had barely touched the edge of the paper when Alexander stepped over to the coffee table and picked up the small remote lying beside the photo frame. He pressed a button. The large screen on the wall lit up, replaying recordings from the kitchen and the living room. There was no background music, no sweet explanations, only the sharp sound of slaps, Jacob's hoarse crying, and Victoria's harsh voice about boarding school and milk rations. Victoria shot to her feet, her face pale, then flushing red. "You set me up. This is staged. It's been edited." She grabbed for the stack of papers and yanked them toward herself. Richard Coleman froze for a moment, then cleared his throat, trying to stay composed. "Mr. Reed, we can discuss this privately. Cameras inside a home don't capture the full context. Legally speaking, I advise you to—" Alexander did not look at Richard. He fast-forwarded to the moment when Victoria snatched the bottle of milk from Jacob's reach and slapped Sophia for dropping a spoon. The footage was crystal clear, undeniable. Victoria gripped her hair, screaming into the child's face. Her voice hissed through clenched teeth. "All of this property should have belonged to me. It's not for some brat to ruin everything." Sophia, trembling, held Jacob close against the wall. Hearing his stepmother's voice, the boy began to cry again. Alexander tilted his head toward the door and spoke softly but firmly. "Now." The door opened. Detective Daniel Harris entered with 2 officers. Harris, around 40, carried himself with steady authority, his voice deep and calm, the kind of tone shaped by years of handling child cases. He held up a search warrant and an arrest order, his eyes moving across the screen before resting on Sophia. "Are you all right?" Sophia gave the slightest nod, clutching her little brother tighter. Richard stepped forward, extending a business card. "I am her attorney. My client—" Harris did not argue. He turned to one officer. "Seize the storage devices. Seal the files on the table." Just then, the doorbell rang. A man in a dark shirt, carrying a leather briefcase under his arm, walked in as if he owned the place. Harris blocked his way. "Name?" The man flinched. "Anthony Blake, accountant." Harris gave a curt nod and signaled his team. "Detain him on suspicion of fraud and embezzlement. Read him his rights on the spot." The air vibrated with the formal cadence of procedure. Richard faltered, then tried to recover. "You're mistaken. This is a civil matter." Harris pointed at the screen, where bank statements and transfer schedules appeared from the very file Anthony had just brought in. "And this is financial evidence. We already have confirmation from the bank." Victoria struggled as a female officer approached. "Don't touch me. You will regret this, Alexander. Without me, you are nothing." Her voice cracked, stripped of its velvet cover. She turned to Sophia, her eyes flashing with venom. "You ruined everything. That's enough." Alexander spoke quietly, but the words cut deep. He walked around the table to where the children were. Sophia instinctively stepped back, then stopped when she saw him extend his arms for Jacob. Alexander lifted his son. Jacob cried once more, then gradually quieted as his head rested against his father's shoulder. For the first time, Alexander felt the full warmth and weight of his son in his arms. He drew in a long breath, as if swallowing back the blade that had been lodged in his chest all this time. "I'm sorry, son. I let you suffer for too long." Murmurs began to rise from the hallway. The apartment door opened, and a few curious neighbors paused at the scene. Patricia Gomez pushed her way to the front, polite enough but unable to hide her outrage. She looked at Victoria, who was now handcuffed and breathless with rage. "A mother like you doesn't deserve to be called a mother." Victoria glared but was escorted toward the door, the sound of her heels dragging across the wooden floor. Harris turned back, his voice lowered. "Mr. Reed, from now on the children will remain with you. We'll assign a social worker to review the living conditions. I also need to back up all the camera footage. Attorney Henry Collins is on his way to assist you." Alexander nodded. "Thank you." He looked at Sophia. "Are you hurt anywhere?" She shook her head, her eyes fixed on her father's strong hands holding Jacob securely. Richard stood cuffed beside Anthony at the door, still twisting his neck to look back. "You'll hear from us." "This isn't over." Harris pointed toward the hall. "Take them away." The elevator doors closed, leaving an abrupt silence in the once noisy living room. On the screen, the last recording still played the image of Sophia on tiptoe, placing the tender piece of meat into Jacob's bowl. Alexander held Jacob tighter. The boy had stopped crying, his tired eyes slowly closing. Alexander lowered himself to meet Sophia's gaze. "I'm here." The simple words fell like a stone into the deep well of the girl's heart. Her small shoulders trembled, her breath caught. Sophia looked straight into her father's eyes, tears brimming, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Are you going to leave us again, Dad?" Alexander did not answer Sophia's question right away. He knelt down to her level and pulled both siblings into his chest. "Daddy is here," he said slowly, "and Daddy is staying." He stood up, adjusted the blanket on Jacob's shoulders, then carried the boy back to the bedroom. When he laid him in the crib, Alexander went out to the kitchen, grabbed the bottle, and fumbled with the formula. The water was a little too hot. He drew his hand back and exhaled sharply. Sophia stood pressed against the cupboard, watching him, lips tight, as if afraid he might get it wrong. Alexander lifted his head and spoke softly. "Remind me of the ratio." Sophia stepped forward halfway, pointing with her finger. "2 scoops, up to this line." He nodded and followed exactly. Only when Jacob was sucking on the bottle did Sophia finally release her grip on the side of the crib. In the days that followed, Alexander got up at night himself to feed Jacob. He changed diapers, learned to shift the baby from one arm to the other, learned to soothe him with a steady rhythm of his hand. Sophia still kept her guard. She often stood at the doorway, ready to rush in if Jacob cried. Many times Alexander wanted to say something but held back. He understood she did not need promises. She needed to see he was truly there. One night, Jacob spiked a fever. The thermometer shot up. His little face flushed red, eyes dazed. Alexander lifted him, his heart pounding. "Get my coat," he said, his voice shaking. Sophia scrambled to pull a thick jacket from the closet. They raced to the elevator and out to the car. The night wind cut cold, and Alexander held Jacob tight against his chest. On the drive to the hospital, he kept repeating, as if to himself, "Don't leave me, Jacob. Don't leave me." In the back seat, Sophia pressed close to him, for the first time resting her head on her father's shoulder, her small breaths trembling with fear. The emergency ward was a bright white. A young nurse named Carla met them, her voice clear and calm. "Put the baby here." The pediatrician doctor, Benjamin Carter, examined quickly, lowered the fever, and instructed them on electrolytes. He explained gently, "It's a viral fever. Keep him hydrated and watch closely. If he has trouble breathing or a seizure, come back immediately." Alexander nodded again and again, his eyes never leaving Jacob. Sophia sat beside them, her hands clasped as if she were praying. When the fever eased, Jacob drifted into sleep. Alexander leaned back against the wall and, for the first time, let out a long, slow breath. They returned home near dawn. Sophia followed her father into the kitchen, lit the kettle herself, and prepared a mild ginger tea. "Drink this, Daddy." Alexander accepted the cup, smiling faintly. "Thank you." He glanced up at the clock on the wall, then back at his daughter. "You'll stay home from school this morning. I'll write a note." Sophia nodded. Her eyes no longer looked away, though shadows still lingered within them. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Emily Parker stood outside, wearing a long coat, holding a paper bag in her arms. "I came by to visit," she said with a gentle smile. Sophia lit up with joy. Emily opened the bag and took out a few small cartons of milk and some storybooks. She looked at Alexander. "You have to be patient. She doesn't need promises. She needs to see that you truly stay." Alexander stood still for a moment before replying. "I understand." Emily turned to Sophia. "I'll be here for a while, okay?" Sophia leaned against her teacher briefly, like rediscovering an old reflex. News of Victoria's arrest spread quickly through the building. The community around the neighborhood shifted ever so slightly. Patricia Gomez knocked on the door, carrying a pot of hot chicken soup. "For the children," she said, without a single lecture, just placing her hand gently on Sophia's shoulder. Later that afternoon, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile arrived from Chelsea Diner, introducing herself. "I'm Maggie Lewis. I own the diner at the corner. Patricia told me, so I brought some milk and soft bread. If you need a hot meal, call me." Alexander, a bit unsettled, still accepted. "Thank you." Maggie shook her head. "We're neighbors." That simple statement cracked part of the ice wall he had built around himself. Night fell, and the apartment carried a new kind of peace. Jacob slept deeply, his cheeks rosy after the fever. Sophia sat at the table with a new red notebook. She wrote slowly, carefully, as if the words might wound something fragile. Alexander passed by, stopping at the doorway but not entering. He saw her small hand tremble slightly on the pen, then steady. Sophia closed the notebook, placed it in the drawer, and locked it carefully as though protecting a seed. Days went by, the rhythm at home slow but steady. Alexander set the alarm to prepare milk on time. Sophia readied towels and changed diapers. They didn't speak much, but every gesture began to fit together like music regaining its rhythm. In the evenings, Alexander made hot cocoa for his daughter. "Drink this." Sophia inhaled the smell, whispering softly. "Mom used to make it too." Alexander lowered his face into the rising steam. "I know." He stayed silent for a while, then added the words he had owed her for a long time. "I'm sorry, Sophia." On Sunday night, while Sophia was in the bath, Alexander opened the desk drawer to get a towel. He saw the red notebook. Hesitating, he placed his hand on it, pulled back, but finally opened it. The first page was brief, written neatly, no more trembling strokes like the old notebook. "Today, Dad carried my brother, and he laughed." On the next page, short, scattered lines. "Dad made milk himself. Dad read a story. Dad stayed home all evening." Alexander closed the notebook, his heart warming in a way both strange and familiar. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking at Olivia's framed picture on the wall. Her eyes in the photo were still gentle, as if waiting for an answer. Alexander drew a deep breath, his voice low and steady, like sending a message into the void. "Olivia, I kept my promise to you." Tears rolled down slowly. At the door, Sophia walked back in with her cup of cocoa, catching her father wiping his eyes. She didn't ask. She set the cup down and pulled her chair closer. Jacob shifted in his crib, breathing evenly. The three of them sat quietly for a while, no one speaking, but the room warmed as though someone had just added logs to the fire. In the hall, Patricia closed her own door and exhaled in relief. At the corner, Maggie pinned a small note in her kitchen. "Soup for the Reed family tomorrow night." On the class bulletin board, Emily posted a blue slip. "Parent support group, meeting next week." Invisible threads wove together, strong enough for a fractured family to hold on and rise again. That night, when Alexander tucked Sophia into bed, she opened her eyes and whispered, "I'm not as afraid as before anymore." Alexander touched her hair gently. "I know." He turned toward Jacob, placing his hand over the small chest, rising and falling evenly. In the silence, he heard another rhythm, steady and patient, stitching back together the place that had once been broken inside him. The next morning, Alexander woke up before the alarm. He prepared milk for Jacob, placed the bottle in his son's hands, then opened his laptop right there at the kitchen table. He typed a headline slowly, as if afraid to break something fragile that had just begun to heal. "Hope Haven Center, founding plan." He called Henry Collins. "I need to file the legal paperwork for a nonprofit center, as soon as possible." Henry answered briefly, "All right, sign this afternoon." 3 days later, a woman with short brown hair arrived at the apartment. "I'm Erin Morales," she introduced herself. "I used to be a social worker. Now I coordinate programs for abandoned children." Erin spoke little, her voice steady. She read through the plan, then looked up. "You have a clear goal. We'll start with a small kitchen, a counseling room, and a learning corner. I'll gather volunteers." Alexander nodded. "Thank you. I don't want a place that looks pretty in pictures. I want a place where kids feel safe." City Hall quickly approved the license. Maggie Lewis brought pastries, smiling. "For the opening, you need the smell of a kitchen." Patricia Gomez carried in a box of children's books, speaking firmly. "The reading corner must be full." Emily Parker showed up holding a box of crayons. "I'll take care of the small afternoon classes." Erin arranged the duty schedule, bringing in 2 psychology students. "Let me introduce you," she pointed. "Jared and Mia both have summer camp experience." Jared was tall and slender, with a gentle smile. Mia spoke softly, her eyes full of listening. On cleanup day, Sophia stood by the blank wall, brush in hand. Alexander handed her a box of paints. "What do you want to draw?" The little girl stared at the space for a long while before sketching the first lines, each stroke slow and firm. Aaron read aloud the words Sophia wrote with both hands. "Family is where no one is left behind." She turned to Alexander. "That's the soul of this place." Sophia gave a faint smile. Jacob sat nearby in the stroller, his hands waving in the air to the rhythm of laughter around him. Weeks passed, and Hope Haven began to breathe on its own. The kitchen corner was always warm. A small room with 2 armchairs for counseling. A bulletin board listed shifts. Alexander didn't walk around like a boss, but like an apprentice. He asked Aaron about the intake process, asked Jared about setting up the safe space, asked Emily about suitable reading lessons. Every answer was like laying another brick onto his trust in himself. News of Victoria's trial came through Henry's email. "Convicted of child abuse and financial fraud," Henry said over the phone. 3 years in prison, plus probation, banned from contact with children. Alexander stayed silent for a few seconds. "I won't attend the press conference." Henry understood. "You're doing the right thing." After the verdict, social media overflowed with condemnation. Alexander shut the screen. He lifted Jacob, resting the boy's head on his shoulder. "We don't live by throwing stones," he told himself. "We live by the work we do." One afternoon, the activity room floor was covered with a new rug. Aaron was checking inventory when Sophia called softly. "Dad, look." Jacob was standing unsteadily by the arm of a chair, his chubby legs testing each step. Alexander knelt, arms wide open. "Come here, son." Jacob looked at him, smiled, then took a wobbly step. Another one. Cheers erupted through the room. Jacob toppled into his father's arms. Alexander held him tight, the emptiness in his chest filling as if sealed. Sophia clapped, her eyes glowing like a light just switched on. On Christmas Eve, Hope Haven set up a tree in the backyard. Strings of lights glowed warmly. The children sang Silent Night, their voices young but in harmony. Maggie handed out hot cocoa. Patricia offered cookies. Emily guided the kids to hang paper stars. Aaron checked her list, whispering to Alexander, "Everyone's here today." He looked around. The children stood close together, no one left out. Sophia, in a red coat, clutched her father's arm. "Dad, can I hang this?" She held up a small handwritten sign. "Family is where no one is left behind." Alexander nodded. "Hang it at the very top." A small voice called from behind. "Dad?" Alexander froze in place. He turned around. Jacob was looking at him, his mouth opening once more, clear and full. "Dad." No one shouted, but every face around them was smiling. Alexander lifted his son into his arms, holding him close but not too tightly. Sophia leaned against her father's chest, listening to the steady, warm rhythm of his heartbeat. "Did you hear that?" Alexander whispered softly, his voice trembling yet tender. "He just called me Dad." At the end of the evening, Aaron brought over a new list of donations. "Someone wants to sponsor small scholarships for the children old enough to attend school," she said, her eyes bright but steady. "We will be transparent. We will do this the right way." Alexander signed his name at the bottom line, then looked up. "Thank you, everyone." He touched each hand offered to him, not only as a formality, but as a promise carried forward. When the lights dimmed, the final notes of the song still lingered in the courtyard. Sophia looked at her father, her smile radiant, her eyes no longer clouded by fear. Jacob slept in Alexander's arms, his breathing calm and light. Snowflakes drifted from the sky. Alexander tilted his face upward, then lowered his gaze to his 2 children. He spoke slowly, clearly, as if to let every word rest exactly where it belonged. "We have lost too much, but from now on there will be only light. The story does not close with revenge, but with a new path, a place where justice speaks, where hearts choose what is right. The wicked are punished, the good are rewarded, and a father learns again what it means to be a father. That is the message I want to leave with you. Sometimes the light arrives late, but it always comes to those who persist in defending kindness. Hope Haven is not just a center, it is a promise that no one will be left behind." What do you think about the moment when Alexander held Jacob and whispered his apology? If it were you, what would you do when caught between fear and the truth. Do you believe that one timely word of stop can save an entire childhood? And if you were in Sophia's place, how would you send a signal for help, and to whom? Please share your perspective, because every comment might be a lifeline for someone who needs it. I also want to check in with you today. Are you doing okay? Has anything this week left you feeling worn out? If you are going through a difficult time, leave a few words here, and I, along with this community, will listen. This is a place for heartwarming stories, for emotional stories. A place where we remind each other that kindness still abounds. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone you long to hold close. Who knows, it might be the very ray of light someone has been waiting for.